Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is having a great day and a good end of the week. So we often talk about a rational discussion. We throw out words like rational and irrational, but it comes to my mind that a lot of people may not actually know what that means. So what does it mean to have a rational discussion? I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of what you need and what's the point of a rational discussion. All right. So what's the point of a rational discussion? Well, it's not to win. The goal is not to win, even though in some sense you do try to win. You want to win an argument. But really the goal, if you're a rational person, is not to win. The goal is a cooperative enterprise for the people that are discussing it to get closer to the truth. And if that turns out that you're wrong, that is actually a good thing. It's a good thing. Why? It's a good thing because now both of you are closer to the truth. And that's the goal. You want to be closer to the truth. Now, that does presuppose a few things, like there is something called objective truth. If there was no objective truth and we couldn't know it, then every discussion would be like, I like vanilla, you like chocolate, end of story. There's no reason to reason about that. The authority is basically you like this, you like that. Okay. So objective truth, that's the point. If you don't have that in mind, then you have to ask yourself, well, are you actually part of a rational discussion? If you aren't trying to articulate your thoughts and discuss with another person so that you both are closer to the truth, you both understand the reasoning that you guys have, then what are you doing? Okay, so objective truth. You need to be pursuing that. If you're not, you got to question your motivations. Well, how do you have a rational discussion? Okay, so you need to be after truth. That's one thing, but that's basically the goal. The goal and the means towards the goal are not the same thing, so they are related. Okay, so here are some very boiled down tips. You need to focus on the argument and not the person. Remember, a good person could have a bad argument, a bad person could have a good argument, a very brilliant person could actually make a misstep in reasoning, or you could actually just have bad data. There's tons of examples in history where very, very brilliant people have believed something that was actually quite false. Now, obviously, since they are brilliant and they did do their research, it wasn't, well, we wouldn't say it's a stupid mistake, but just because you're brilliant, just because you do your research, just because you read a lot, that doesn't mean you're right. It just doesn't. So focus on the argument. Break down those arguments into premises. These are basically statements, propositions. And then the links between the premises, and that relates to validity. Now, if you guys have not studied logic, this is kind of foreign to you. The idea is that you separate an argument from the person, because if something's true, it's going to be true regardless of who's saying it. Okay. Now, as a matter of how do you go about this, yeah, you have to study a little bit of logic. You have to understand what valid reasoning is and invalid reasoning. You have to familiarize yourself with fallacies, which this all takes work. That's why, as an educator and as a philosopher, I advocate for logical training in, middle school and high school before you go out as an adult. You're definitely less prepared to wrestle with the issues of the world if you don't know logic. So check that out if you haven't. Okay. So what are some necessary conditions of a rational discussion? Okay. So there are things that you have to have in place, things that you presuppose for you to do logic. The axioms of logic. I'm not going to go in depth in this video because this is just an introduction, but you have to have certain commitments to logic so that you could listen to a logical argument that it has force. Okay. Also, you have to have a philosophy that's not absurd. I can't get to a full philosophical critique in a few minutes, but the idea is you have to have certain assumptions in place for you to have a rational discussion. And one of those things is that you can make a distinction between the way you feel and where the evidence and the reasoning is leading. And that authority of reason doesn't just happen on accident, it requires cultivation. And we can all start that process of cultivating ourselves to be more sensitive to where arguments lead and how we feel. And often what we feel is completely wrong. And this goes back to the point of objective truth. If you're not after objective truth, and you're not going to listen to what an argument says, you can always say, well, I don't like it, so I'm not going to accept it. Well, if you really can just opt out of any argument, you're not really having a rational argument. If you basically can reject any conclusion you dislike because it doesn't make you feel good, well, what's the point of discussing it? There is no point. Now, if you look at the evils of the world, if you are irrational, you won't be able to recognize what the evils really are, nor will you be able to come up with a prescription. So just as a doctor, if they get the diagnosis wrong, the prescription may also be wrong. It probably is wrong. If you can't diagnose things, you can't discuss things rationally, we can't cooperate together, we can't build on each other's knowledge, nor can we even tell the difference between what is true knowledge versus something that appears to be knowledge but really isn't. So being rational is not just something that philosophers care about. It's something that everyone as human beings should care about. Okay. So do we need rational discussions? Yes. But does it just happen? No, it doesn't. Now, there are a few tips that I can just say in passing, and if you want to get an elaboration of them, check out my website, commonphilosopher.com. But here are some last-minute tips, basically that kind of reiterate some of the stuff that I've been talking about. Okay, tip one, if you don't want the truth first, then you're not really having a discussion, okay? So the truth is something that you're after, and you got to check yourself. Are you really after the truth, which may be something you don't believe, or it may be something that you're not well disposed towards because it might be something that's uncomfortable? So for instance, if you're talking about a moral question, it may turn out that you are morally wrong, which as a rational person, you'd have to change your life. Most people don't like that. But of course, if you're not prepared to make a change based on new evidence with a sound argument, what's the point of even discussing it? Two, ask yourself if you can tell the difference between emotions and reasoning. Now, this is very difficult. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. It is very difficult, but it's just like lifting weights. The sooner you start doing it, and doing it, with good technique, the sooner you make those gains. If you always avoid it, then you'll never be at it. You'll never be good at it. And it's not something you just do. It's not like you just take a class, like, oh, I had a class in logic. Well, I've had classes in logic. I've read many books on logic. I often find myself being pulled in a direction that is not logical. It's more about what I would like, but fits better with the way that I want things to be rather than how things are. Okay, so learn to separate the difference between emotions and reasoning. Okay, check yourself. Do you refuse to admit that you might be wrong? If you will not change your view based on certain pieces of evidence, you have to ask yourself, are you rational at all? Are you really a person that can even have a rational discussion? If you can't, you need to red flag yourself. What commitment am I trying to uphold? Okay. All right. Next thing, you have to think about it. Do you really think that this is a cooperative enterprise? Because that's essential. You need to know that a rational discussion is a cooperative enterprise, that you both are trying to get closer to the truth. And if you're wrong, that's a good thing, because now you're closer to the truth. That's the goal. It's not about trying to show the other person's wrong. If that's your motivation, then you got to check yourself. Am I approaching this the right way? Okay, last tip. Check yourself about the results of reasoning and whether or not you would change your view. If you won't change it no matter what, you have to think about what do you think the authority of reason is. If you can always reject any conclusion, no matter what, whether the premises are true and the reason's valid, then what's the point of rational discussion in the first place? Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. You guys have a great day.